October 14th, 1943. 25,000 feet over Schweinfurt. The air inside Technical Sergeant Robert Mitchell's B-17 is so cold it burns to breathe. Through the waist gun window, the aluminum skin of the bomber next to his own hangs impossibly close. Maybe 50 feet. Close enough to see rivets. Close enough to see the waist gunner over there, hunched behind his own .50 caliber, scanning the same murderous sky. A Focke-Wulf 190 flashes through Mitchell's field of view. Instinct takes over. He swings the gun, leads the target exactly as trained, squeezes the trigger. Tracer rounds arc outward in a graceful curve. The fighter rolls away, completely untouched. Mitchell's burst sails past, missing by what feels like 100 feet. But something else happens. Something he doesn't see. His tracers pass within 20 feet of the bomber flying formation to his right, through the exact space where its wing meets the fuselage. Through what every instructor at gunnery school called the forbidden zone. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. Mitchell is not alone in this failure. Across the formation, thousands of rounds pour into the October sky. Almost nothing hits. The mathematics of aerial gunnery are collapsing under the weight of reality. What the training manuals promised and what physics delivers are two entirely different things. And caught between these truths is a more immediate problem, one whispered about in crew quarters but never officially acknowledged. To hit the enemy, you might have to risk hitting your friends. This is the second Schweinfurt raid. The first, back in August, cost 60 bombers. This one will cost another 60. The aircrews call it Black Thursday. The planners in England call it unsustainable. Deep penetration raids into Germany without fighter escort are bleeding the 8th Air Force. Faster than replacement crews can arrive. Something has to change. The question is what? 2 months earlier, the illusion had cracked wide open. August 17th, 1943. The 8th Air Force launches 2 massive raids simultaneously, Regensburg and Schweinfurt, a combined force of 376 B-17 seconds, the largest daylight raid yet attempted. The plan is audacious. Hit the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg, then fly on to North Africa instead of returning to England. Hit the ball-bearing plants at Schweinfurt with a second wave. Split the Luftwaffe's defences. Overwhelm them with numbers. The execution falls apart almost immediately. Weather delays the Schweinfurt force. Instead of launching simultaneously, the raids go in hours apart. The Luftwaffe is not split. It has time to refuel and rearm between attacks. The German fighters hit both formations with everything available. By nightfall, 60 bombers are gone. 600 men died, wounded, or captured. Many more bombers will never fly again, written off due to battle damage. Gunners file after-action reports claiming hundreds of German fighters destroyed. The numbers grow in the telling. One gunner claims 2 confirmed kills. Another gunner in the same bomber claims those same 2 fighters. A third gunner saw them go down and added them to his own tally. Multiply this across dozens of bombers and the claimed numbers become fantastic. The 8th Air Force initially reports 288 enemy aircraft destroyed. Post-war records paint a different picture. German loss reports for that day show approximately 25 fighters destroyed in combat with the bombers, perhaps another dozen damaged beyond repair. 10 gunners fire at the same fighter. It trails smoke and dives away. All 10 claim a kill. Only 1 fighter actually went down. The gap between claim and reality is not dishonesty. It is physics combined with the fog of war. Human marksmanship, no matter how well trained, cannot keep pace with closing speeds, deflection angles, and the thin air at altitude where bullets behave differently than they do on the ground. But beyond the overclaiming issue lies a more fundamental problem. Even with the overcounted claims, even if every claimed kill had been real, the Germans would still have won the exchange. 60 heavy bombers with 10 crew members each versus even 300 fighters with single pilots. The mathematics favour the defence. Consider the problem facing any waist gunner in detail. The B-17G has a crew of 10. 4 of them are dedicated gunners. Ball turret, 2 waist positions, and tail. 3 others, man guns as secondary duties, the flight engineer on the top turret, the radio operator on the radio room gun, the bombardier and navigator on the cheek guns. That is 7 potential gun positions, most carrying twin 50 caliber machine guns. A single Messerschmitt 109 charges head-on at combined closure rates approaching 600 miles per hour. From first sight to fly-by, you have perhaps 2 seconds. The fighter appears first as a speck, then a shape, then identifiable. By the time you've confirmed it's hostile and swung your gun to bear, you're inside 1.5 seconds from flyby. At 25,000 feet, air density drops by 2/3. Bullets behave differently. Trajectories change. You're breathing hard through an oxygen mask in a vibrating aluminum tube. Your electrically heated suit may or may not be working. Your fingers are sluggish, even with heated gloves. You're manhandling 60 pounds of machine gun by hand with no hydraulic assist, fighting vibration and slipstream through a crude ring and bead sight. 14 variables minimum across 3 dimensions. Target angle, target speed, own speed, altitude, air density, bullet time of flight, wind drift, gravity drop, rate of closure, deflection angle, lead distance, trigger delay, gun vibration, sight alignment, solving for all of them requires calculus that must happen faster than thought itself. No human mind can do it consciously with enough accuracy to matter. Some men have natural talent, they shoot instinctively, their brains processing the variables unconsciously. These men become the aces of the bomber defensive war. Staff Sergeant Michael Aruth of the 92nd Bomb Group is credited with 17 confirmed kills as a ball turret gunner. An extraordinary record, but even Aruth, when interviewed, cannot fully explain how he does it. "You feel it more than you think it," he says. The fighter comes in, you know where he'll be, not because you calculated, because you just know. But for every Aruth, there are 100 other gunners who do not have that instinct. They try. They train. They practice on the Waller Trainer, a sophisticated simulator that projects film of German fighters onto a screen while they practice tracking and firing. They do skeet shooting to learn deflection angles. They study aircraft recognition until they can identify a Focke-Wulf 190 from a Messerschmitt 109 at 3,000 yards. They learn their guns intimately, can field strip and reassemble an M2 Browning blindfolded. None of it fully prepares them for the reality of combat. Not while tracer fire and 20mm cannon shells are reaching back toward you. Not while you are watching bombers to your left and right take hits, watching them fall away, trailing smoke and fire, counting parachutes and knowing there will never be enough. Not while the intercom is chaos with voices calling out fighter positions, the pilot demanding status reports, the navigator trying to give course corrections, someone screaming that the number 3 engine is on fire. The pre-war doctrine had seemed so logical, so inevitable. The B-17 Flying Fortress. The name itself was a promise, a bomber that was also a castle in the sky, bristling with machine guns, capable of defending itself. Interlocking, fields of fire, tight formations where each bomber protected the others, precision bombing in daylight, using the revolutionary Norden bomb site, strike military and industrial targets with surgical accuracy, avoid civilian casualties. Win the war through strategic application of air power. It looked perfect on the chalkboard at Air Corps Tactical School in Maxwell, Alabama. Staff officers, many of them veterans of the First World War's primitive air combat, had spent the 1920s and 30s developing doctrine. They studied Giulio Douhet's theories of strategic bombing. They analyzed the capabilities of new technology. They drew diagrams showing how defensive fire from a combat box formation would create overlapping zones of destruction no attacker could survive. The numbers seemed to support the theory. A single B-17E model, introduced in 1941, carried 1150 caliber machine guns. Later, B-17F models carried 12. The final B-17G model carried 13, each gun fired at approximately 850 rounds per minute. Effective range against aircraft was listed as 1,000 yards, though practical effective range was much shorter. But even at reduced effectiveness, a formation of 18 B-17 seconds could theoretically put over 10,000 rounds per minute into the sky. What fighter could survive that? What pilot would be willing to fly through such a curtain of fire? The doctrine assumed rational actors making rational calculations. A German pilot, seeing the concentration of defensive firepower, would break off the attack rather than risk certain death. The bombers could fight their way to the target and back. Fighter escort would be unnecessary, even wasteful. The bombers would be self-sufficient. The sky did not care about chalkboards or theories or rational actor models. By autumn of 1943, the gap between doctrine and reality has become a crisis that threatens the entire strategic bombing campaign. The 8th Air Force is losing bombers at a rate that cannot be sustained. On some missions, loss rates exceed 10%. The mathematics are brutal. A crew is required to fly 25 missions to complete a tour. If the loss rate is 10% per mission, the odds of surviving a full tour drop below 10%. The crews can do that math in their heads. They know what it means. The replacements cannot keep pace. Training new crews takes months. B-17 production is ramping up, with Boeing's Seattle plant, Douglas in Long Beach, and Vega in Burbank all building the bomber. By 1944, production will exceed 8,000 B-17 seconds per year. But empty bombers are useless. You need trained crews, 10 men per bomber. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, tail gunner. Each position requires specialized training. The pipeline takes time, and the Luftwaffe is not standing still. German fighter tactics are evolving rapidly in response to the bomber threat. The early defensive fighters, Messerschmitt 109s and Focke-Wulf 190s designed primarily for air superiority, are being supplemented with purpose-built bomber destroyers. Heavy armament, extra armor, willingness to accept reduced performance in exchange for increased hitting power. The Focke-Wulf 190A-8/R2 variant carries 2 20mm cannons in the wing roots and 2 30mm Mk.108 cannons in underwing pods. The 30mm round carries 165 grams of high explosive. A single hit can destroy a B-17's engine. 2 or 3 hits can down the bomber. The pilot can fire from outside the effective range of defensive 50 caliber fire and shred the target. The Messerschmitt 110 heavy fighter is adapted for bomber assault, twin engine, 2 crew, forward-firing armament that grows with each variant. Some models carry 4 20mm cannons and 4 machine guns. Later variants add rocket launchers. The Werfer Granit 21 rocket, adapted from a ground-launched mortar, can be fired from 1,000 meters and strike with devastating effect. The warhead weighs over 40 kilograms. German tactics also evolved. Initial attacks came from the rear and sides, where the bombers had the most defensive guns. The Luftwaffe quickly learned this was suicide against tight formations. They shifted to head-on attacks, exploiting the B-17's initial weakness in forward armament. The early B-17E and F models had only the cheek guns forward, manually aimed 50 calibers operated by the bombardier and navigator, not enough to stop a determined attack. The Americans responded by adding the chin turret to the B-17G model, 250 calibers in a power-operated turret directly below the nose. This forced the Luftwaffe to adapt again, mass attacks from multiple directions simultaneously. Company front formations, 8 to 16 fighters approaching together from the same vector, hoping to overwhelm the defensive fire through sheer numbers. Rocket attacks from outside effective gun range, attempts to drop aerial bombs on the formations from above. Each adaptation and counter-adaptation increased the lethality of the air war. The losses mounted on both sides, but the strategic calculation favored Germany. They were defending. Their pilots who bailed out landed in friendly territory and could return to combat. American aircrews who bailed out over Germany became prisoners of war. The Luftwaffe could afford higher loss rates because their pilots were recoverable assets. The 8th Air Force could not. By October of 1943, the crisis point arrives. The second Schweinfurt raid, Black Thursday, makes the mathematics undeniable. 60 bombers lost in a single day, 22% of the attacking force, 5 more damaged beyond repair, hundreds of others were damaged. If this is the cost of deep penetration raids, the campaign cannot continue. Either the doctrine must change, or the strategic bombing of Germany must be suspended. General Henry Hap Arnold, commanding general of the Army Air Forces, faces a choice. Admit that the doctrine was wrong, that unescorted daylight bombing is not feasible, or find a way to make it work. The former means abandoning years of planning and investment. It means validating the critics who said strategic bombing was a fantasy. It means ceding the daylight skies to Germany. The latter requires solving problems that have defeated the best minds in the service. Arnold chooses to make it work. But making it work requires multiple changes simultaneously. Long-range fighter escorts are in development. The P-51 Mustang, equipped with drop tanks, will eventually be able to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, but that is months away from operational deployment. In the meantime, the bombers must continue to fly. The pressure from political leadership demands it. Churchill and Roosevelt have promised the Soviet Union a strategic bombing campaign to divert German resources from the Eastern Front. That promise must be kept. The immediate solution focuses on what can be changed now, today, without waiting for new aircraft or new technology. Tactics, training. Doctrine. The way the gunners fight. At Bassingbourn Aerodrome, home of the 91st Bomb Group, a ball turret gunner named Master Sergeant Anthony Kowalski begins to develop a different approach during missions in late summer of 1943. Kowalski is not an officer. He has no formal training in mathematics or engineering. He is a factory worker from Pittsburgh, drafted into service, trained as a gunner, assigned to a crew. But he has something valuable. He has instinct, and he has the results to prove his instinct works. Kowalski abandons careful tracking entirely. The training manuals say to follow the fighter, lead it based on speed and angle. Fire a short burst, observe the tracer fall, adjust, fire again. Precise, methodical, effective against slow-moving targets or targets flying straight and level, completely useless against a fighter in a high-speed attack run. Instead, Kowalski does something that seems almost random at first. He does not track the fighter. He identifies where the fighter is going. He knows, from experience and observation, that fighters making beam attacks must follow certain paths. Physics constrains them. To bring guns to bear on a bomber, the fighter must be at a specific angle at a specific distance. To break off safely, the fighter must dive or climb or roll in predictable patterns. Human tolerance for G-forces limits how sharply they can maneuver. So Kowalski sprays lead ahead of where the fighter must go. He opens fire early, before the fighter enters his theoretical range. He walks his tracers across the path, creating a stream of bullets in space. Then he holds the trigger and keeps firing as the fighter commits to its approach. He is not trying to hit the fighter where it is. He is trying to fill the space where it will be. Force the fighter to fly through bullets rather than chasing the fighter with bullets. The other gunners in his squadron mock him at first. They see him firing long bursts at empty sky. They see his tracer streams spraying in patterns that make no sense according to the training manuals. The numbers do not add up. Kowalski is burning through ammunition at an alarming rate. A .50 caliber belt holds approximately 570 rounds. He empties belts in under a minute. The radio operator, responsible for managing ammunition distribution, complains that Kowalski is using 3 times the normal load. But Kowalski starts getting results, not every time, but more often than the careful, precise shooters who are doing everything by the book. On a mission to Bremen in October, Kowalski's steady stream of fire intercepts a Messerschmitt 109 making a beam attack. The fighter flies directly into the bullet stream. Witnesses see pieces fly off the wing. The Messerschmitt rolls, dives, and does not reappear. Confirmed kill. On a mission to Düren in November, Kowalski's fire forces 3 different fighters to break off their attack runs early. None of them are hit. None are confirmed destroyed. but all three disengage before reaching effective firing range on the bomber. From a strategic perspective, this is as good as shooting them down. The bomber survives. The mission continues. That is what matters. Word spreads through the barracks and crew quarters. Other gunners start asking Kowalski about his technique. He struggles to explain it in technical terms because he does not think about it technically. "I don't aim at the plane," he says. "I aim at the air. I fill the space. I make it so expensive to attack that they'd rather go somewhere else. It's like..." He pauses, searching for the right metaphor. "It's like a garden hose. You don't point it at one spot. You sweep it back and forth. Cover the whole area. Something's going to get wet." The garden hose. The nickname sticks. Kowalski's technique became known as the garden hose method. Officially, no one endorses it. No instructor adds it to the curriculum. No manual recommends it. But unofficially, it spreads through the bomber groups like wildfire. Gunners talk to other gunners. Crews rotate back to the States for rest and training duty. They bring the technique with them. New gunners heading to England hear about it during the transatlantic flight. In England, an operations research team has been studying the problem from a different angle. Operations research is a new discipline, born from the immediate needs of wartime. Take the scientific method, apply it to military operations, find ways to improve effectiveness through systematic analysis. The British pioneered it. The Americans adopted it. By 1943, both the 8th Air Force and RAF Bomber Command have dedicated operations research sections. The 8th's operations research team is small, a dozen analysts, mix of military officers with technical backgrounds and civilian scientists in uniform. Their mandate is broad: study any aspect of bomber operations and recommend improvements. They have looked at formation tactics, bomb aiming techniques, aircraft survivability, maintenance procedures, crew fatigue. Now they turn their attention to defensive gunnery. Major William Becker, a physicist before the war, leads the gunnery analysis. He has access to gun camera footage from fighters, combat film from bombers, after-action reports, maintenance records showing ammunition expenditure, casualty reports, intelligence assessments of German losses. He begins by asking a simple question: what actually works? The process takes months. Becker and his team watch hundreds of hours of film, frame-by-frame analysis of actual engagements. They log every instance of defensive fire. They note the angle of attack, the range, the type of fighter, the defensive gun position, the number of rounds fired, the apparent result. They look for patterns. The pattern they find contradicts everything the training manuals teach. The best gunners, the ones who get confirmed kills or at minimum force fighters to break off attacks, are not the most accurate shooters. They are not the ones who carefully track and lead their targets. They are the ones who fire the most rounds in the shortest time into the most likely approach corridors. Precision is not just ineffective, it is actively counterproductive. A gunner who waits for the perfect shot, who tries to carefully lead and track, runs out of time. The fighter flashes past before the gunner can get off more than a few rounds. Even if those rounds are perfectly aimed, the probability of a hit is low, one bullet against one fighter. The math does not favor the gunner. A gunner who opens fire early and maintains fire through the entire engagement might fire 200 rounds. Most of those rounds miss. But statistically, across all those rounds, some will be in the right place at the right time. The fighter must fly through a cone of fire. The probability of a hit increases dramatically. 200 rounds creates 200 chances for a hit, not just one. Becker wrote a preliminary report in November of 1943. He is careful with his wording because he knows the implications are controversial. He is essentially recommending that gunners abandon training that has been standard for decades. But the data is clear. He submits the report through channels. Meanwhile, at Eglin Field in Florida, the United States Army Air Force's Proving Ground Command runs practical experiments. This is where new aircraft and equipment get tested under controlled conditions before operational deployment. It has the facilities, the instrumentation, the technical expertise. In late 1943, They begin a series of gunnery tests specifically focused on bomber defense. The setup is elaborate. Radio-controlled drones, modified B-17 seconds and B-24 seconds, fly programmed attack profiles. The drones simulate German fighter tactics: beam attacks, head-on passes, tail chases, high-side runs. Real B-17 crews, flying in formation, engage the drones with live ammunition. Cameras record everything. Instrumentation measures hit probability, ammunition expenditure, engagement times. The tests run for months, hundreds of drone sorties, thousands of hours of flight time, millions of rounds fired. The costs are enormous. Several drones are destroyed, not by defensive fire but by mechanical failures or pilot error. One test crew crashes, 2 men are killed. The program continues. The need for answers overrides the costs. The results come in throughout the winter of 1943 and early 1944. Different test scenarios, different variables, but the overall conclusion is consistent with Becker's analysis. Traditional tracking gunnery yields occasional hits. The probability is low single digits, under ideal conditions. Under combat conditions, with stress and fear and fatigue, the hit probability drops further. Zone firing, when done methodically into mapped approach zones based on actual fighter attack patterns, increases hit probability by a factor of 3 to 5, sometimes more. The numbers vary depending on specific scenarios, but the trend is clear and consistent. Probability beats precision. The theory behind probability firing is not particularly complex. It comes from an unlikely source. Captain Robert Lindsay, an insurance actuary in civilian life, drafted into service and assigned to the operations research team. Insurance companies make money by understanding probability. They calculate the likelihood of events across large populations. An individual is unpredictable. A population is remarkably predictable. Lindsay applies the same logic to aerial combat. An individual enemy pilot is unpredictable, he explains in a briefing to senior officers in January of 1944. Each one makes split-second decisions based on instinct, training, target selection, fuel state, ammunition remaining, perceived threats. You cannot predict what one pilot will do in one engagement. Too many variables, too much chaos. But pilots as a group are absolutely predictable. They must choose certain angles of attack because physics demands those angles. A fighter trying to shoot down a bomber must position itself where its guns can bear on the target. That requires a specific range, a specific angle, a specific approach vector. Deviate too much and the shot becomes impossible. Fighters must break off in predictable patterns because human bodies can only endure so many G-forces. Pull too tight a turn and the pilot blacks out. The limits are physiological, not technical. A Messerschmitt 109 can theoretically pull turns that would kill the pilot. No pilot will push to those limits. They stay within the survivable envelope. That envelope is predictable. If you analyze hundreds of attacks, Lindsay continues, you see patterns emerge. High probability zones. Three-dimensional corridors in space where fighters concentrate, not because pilots choose those zones out of preference, but because tactics and physics force them there. Map those zones. Concentrate defensive fire in those zones. Fill them with bullets. The mathematics work. The officers listening to Lindsay's briefing are skeptical. One colonel interrupts. You're asking my gunners to spray and pray. That's not marksmanship. That's desperation. Lindsay does not flinch. With respect, sir, your gunners are already desperate. What I'm offering is a way to make desperation effective. The room falls silent. Lindsay presses on. You don't aim at a plane, he says. You aim at a future. You aim at where planes must be to attack you. You saturate that space. You force the enemy to either avoid that space or accept casualties. Either way, you win. If they avoid it, they cannot attack effectively. If they enter it, probability favors you. The briefing ends without a clear decision. Senior commanders are reluctant to overhaul training and doctrine based on theoretical calculations and test data. They want proof from actual combat. But combat is messy. Proving anything definitively from combat data is nearly impossible because there is no control group. You cannot run the same mission twice with different tactics and compare results. Curtis LeMay breaks the deadlock. LeMay, commanding the 3rd Bomb Division in late 1943, has a reputation for results over process. He cares about bombs on target and crews coming home. Everything else is negotiable. If probability firing works, he will use it. If it does not work, he will discard it. Simple. LeMay runs his own experiments within his division. He briefs select crews on the probability approach. Fill the zones. High rate of fire. Sustained bursts. Do not chase individual fighters. Create a volume of fire that fighters must penetrate or avoid. He compares their results to crews using traditional tactics. The comparison is imperfect because missions differ, threats vary, luck plays a role. But over dozens of missions, a pattern emerges. Crews using probability tactics report more fighters driven off, fewer successful attack runs by German fighters, lower damage rates to the bombers. LeMay makes the call. He does not wait for approval from higher headquarters. He does not wait for official doctrine changes. He tells his crews, "This is how we do it now. Fill the bucket. Put lead into the air the attacker must occupy to shoot you. Make him cross a wall he cannot see." The bomber groups under LeMay's command begin implementing the changes immediately. The implications are both promising and terrifying. Promising because it might actually work. Early results suggest it does work. Terrifying because those high probability zones, those approaching corridors that must be saturated with fire, often overlap with the exact space where friendly bombers fly in formation. The formations are designed to provide mutual protection through interlocking fields of fire. That means bombers fly close together. The 8th Air Force experiments with different formation patterns throughout the war. The stagger varies: vertical separation, horizontal separation, depth. But all formations share one characteristic. The bombers are close enough that defensive fire from one bomber can protect adjacent bombers. Close enough that defensive fire from one bomber can hit adjacent bombers. A typical group formation in 1944 stacks bombers vertically by 150 to 200 feet and horizontally by similar distances. Some formations are tighter. The wing box formation, 54 bombers in 3 stacked groups, can fit into an airspace less than half a mile on a side. That is 54 aircraft, each with a wingspan of over 100 feet, plus the prop wash and turbulence from multiple engines, all occupying less than half a cubic mile of sky. Now add defensive fire. Each bomber has multiple gun positions, turrets that can traverse and elevate, flexible waist guns that can swing through wide arcs, all of them firing into the same general zones because those are the zones where enemy fighters concentrate. The tracers from one bomber arc past another bomber's wings. Spent brass from upper turrets rains down on bombers below. Stray rounds punch through aluminum skin. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The friendly fire problem is not theoretical. It is documented, though incompletely. Official records show 3 B-17 seconds confirmed lost to fire from other B-17 seconds during the 8th Air Force campaign. 3 confirmed means 3, where the evidence was undeniable. Witnesses saw it happen. Damage patterns clearly showed 50 caliber rounds from angles that could only have come from friendly aircraft. Crew survivors testified to it. How many more were damaged but not destroyed? How many crew casualties resulted from friendly fire but were attributed to enemy action? The records do not say. Cannot say. A 50 caliber hole in aluminum looks like a 50 caliber hole. Whether it came from a Focke-Wulf or another flying fortress, the result is the same. Most damage reports simply note battle damage without specifying the source. Anecdotal evidence suggests friendly fire was more common than official records indicate. Veterans' accounts, collected decades after the war, include multiple references to friendly fire incidents. A waist gunner describes watching tracers from another bomber arc past his window. A pilot reports taking hits during an engagement, but no German fighters were in position to have fired those particular rounds. A tail gunner recalls seeing a bomber below, taking hits from a bomber above, friendly turret fire hitting friendly aircraft. None of these incidents made it into official reports. Why would they? What purpose would it serve? The bomber was damaged. Enemy fire was assumed. No one investigated further. The crew was focused on survival, on making it back to England, on getting the damaged bomber on the ground in one piece. Whether the damage came from German or American guns was immaterial to those immediate concerns. Commanders face an impossible choice. Continue with precision tactics that are provably ineffective, that fail to stop German fighters, that result in bomber losses the service cannot sustain, or embrace probability tactics that are more effective against fighters but carry the risk of friendly casualties. Weigh certain failure against probable success with possible fratricide. The decision is not made in a vacuum. It is made in the context of a desperate air war. By early 1944, the strategic bombing campaign is at a critical juncture. Either it succeeds in degrading German war production and air defences, or it fails, and the entire investment in heavy bombers becomes wasted resources. Hundreds of billions of dollars in current value, hundreds of thousands of trained personnel, the political capital of Allied leadership. The choice is clear when framed in those terms. Accept the risk of friendly fire. Minimize it where possible through formation, discipline, and fire control rules. But accept it, because the alternative is accepting certain defeat. Training changes. Not overnight, not uniformly across all bomb groups, but gradually through winter of 1943 into spring of 1944. The changes start with LeMay's 3rd Division and spread to the other divisions. Instructors at stateside training bases get new guidance. The old manuals are not discarded entirely, but they are supplemented with new material. At Las Vegas Army Airfield, where many gunners receive advanced training, the curriculum shifts. Less emphasis on careful tracking and aimed fire, more emphasis on approach statistics, on rate of fire, on barrel change timing, on keeping guns feeding without stoppages. Instructors, many of them combat veterans rotated back for training duty, describe the new approach in stark terms. "You're not snipers," one instructor tells a class of fresh gunners. "Snipers wait for the perfect shot. You don't have time for perfect. You have seconds. Maybe less. So you don't wait. You open fire early. You sustain fire. You put as much lead downrange as the guns can handle. Accuracy is less important than volume." Another instructor uses a different analogy. Think of it like filling a bucket. The fighter has to fly through a certain area of sky to attack you. Your job is to fill that bucket with bullets. Fill it so full that he can't fly through without hitting something. You're not trying to hit him specifically. You're trying to fill the bucket. The "fill the bucket" phrase has become common. Crews adopt it. It appears in after-action reports. Filled the bucket on a 109, making a high-side run. The fighter broke off. The phrase captures the essential concept: volume over precision, saturation over careful aim. Crews practice coordinated fire. This is emphasized more than it was previously. The combat box formation provides overlapping fields of fire from multiple bombers, but for that overlap to be effective, the gunners must coordinate. They must fire into the same zones simultaneously. Create a density of fire that no single bomber can achieve alone. The nose guns, chin turret and cheek guns focus on forward quadrants, fighters approaching from 12 o'clock high or level. The top turret covers overhead and forward quarters. The ball turret covers below and to the sides. The waist guns cover the beam, 90 degrees to the bomber's centerline. The tail guns cover the rear. Each position has primary zones and secondary zones. Primary zones are where that position has the best field of fire. Secondary zones are where multiple positions overlap. When a fighter attacks, multiple gunners engage simultaneously. The tail gunner might spot an attacker forming up behind the formation at long range. He calls it out over the intercom. "Bogey, 6 o'clock level, 3,000 yards. The other gunners shift attention to their rear quadrants. As the fighter closes, the The tail gunner opens fire first, long-range harassment fire, not expected to hit, but to disrupt the fighter's approach, to make him maneuver, to throw off his aim. As the fighter commits and closes, waist gunners pick him up, both waist gunners if it is a direct beam attack, one waist gunner if it is quartering. They open fire at 1,000 yards, still long range for 50 calibers, but within the envelope where probability starts to matter. Sustained fire, both guns tracking slightly ahead of the fighter's approach path, creating a cone of bullets the fighter must penetrate. If the formation is tight, gunners from adjacent bombers also engage. A fighter attacking one bomber might pass within range of 2 or 3 other bombers. Those gunners fire as well. The coordination is not planned or rehearsed. It emerges naturally from the geometry of the formation and the threat. A fighter attack triggers a defensive reaction from multiple bombers simultaneously. The cumulative fire creates a barrier. This is the interlocking field of fire that the doctrine promised. But it only works if gunners fire early, sustain fire, and focus on zones rather than individual targets. The old way, waiting for clear shots and firing short, precise bursts, left gaps in the coverage. Fighters could exploit those gaps. The new way, early fire and sustained volume, closes the gaps. The Waller gunnery trainer, a sophisticated electromechanical simulator, becomes a critical training tool. The trainer projects film of German fighters onto a translucent screen. The student gunner sits at a mock gun position with an actual 50 caliber machine gun modified to fire a light beam instead of bullets. The beam hits photocells on the screen. The system tracks where the gunner aims, calculates if he would have hit, and provides immediate feedback. The trainer library includes hundreds of attack scenarios filmed from actual German fighter gun cameras or from staged attacks using captured German aircraft. Students practice against Messerschmitt 109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, Messerschmitt 110s, Junkers 88s modified as heavy fighters. Each scenario runs multiple times. Students learn to recognize attack patterns, learn which approach angles are most common, learn where to concentrate fire. The training emphasis shifts from shoot the fighter to paint the zone. Instructors tell students to forget about the aircraft itself, focus on the corridor. The fighter must fly through a specific volume of space to make its attack. Identify that volume, fill it with fire. Whether the fighter is in that volume yet is irrelevant. It will be. That is where mathematics intersects with tactics. New gunners arriving in England in spring of 1944 carry this training with them. They join crews and bomb groups where the veterans have already been applying these techniques through trial and error. The combination of formal training and combat experience accelerates the adoption of probability tactics across the 8th Air Force. None of this makes the sky gentler. The losses continue. On some missions they increase. The Luftwaffe adapts to American tactics just as Americans adapt to Luftwaffe tactics. It is an arms race of technique and technology. German fighters develop standoff tactics, using rockets to engage bomber formations from outside effective machine gun range. The Americans counter by tightening formations and concentrating fire in the rocket launch zones, forcing the Germans closer. German fighters adopt company front attacks, 8 to 16 aircraft approaching simultaneously from the same heading. The mass of fighters overwhelms any single section of the formation. But mass attacks require coordination. The fighters must form up before attacking. That formation phase makes them vulnerable to American escort fighters. The P-47 Thunderbolts, beginning to appear in significant numbers by late 1943, excel at breaking up German formations before they can attack the bombers. The tactical evolution occurs in parallel with technological evolution. The B-17G model, entering service in large numbers in late 1943, addresses the forward firepower gap. The twin 50 caliber Chin turret provides the defensive capability that earlier models lacked. Now, when German fighters attack head-on, they face concentrated fire from the Chin turret, top turret, cheek guns, and potentially the nose guns of adjacent bombers in formation. The head-on attack, once the safest approach for Luftwaffe pilots, becomes increasingly costly. The The Luftwaffe responds with heavier armament. The standard Messerschmitt 109 Gustav carries one 20mm cannon firing through the propeller hub and two 13mm machine guns in the cowling. Effective, but requiring multiple hits to down a B-17. The Focke-Wulf 190 Anton, with its radial engine and heavier airframe, can carry more ordnance. The A-8/R2 variant mounts two Mk-108 30mm cannons in underwing pods, supplementing the standard 20mm wing root cannons. The 30mm Rheinmetall Borsig Mk-108 fires an explosive shell weighing 330 grams. The high explosive content is 52 grams of hexogen, a military explosive significantly more brisant than TNT. A single direct hit on a B-17's engine can blow the entire power plant off the wing. 2 or 3 hits in the fuselage can break the aircraft's back. The Mk-108 is devastating against heavy bombers. It is also slow firing, only 600 rounds per minute compared to 850 for the 50 caliber Browning, and the muzzle velocity is lower, making deflection shooting more difficult. German pilots must close to within 800 meters, preferably closer, to use the Mk-108 effectively. That brings them into the optimal range of American defensive fire. The trade-off is stark. Greater killing power at the cost of greater exposure. Some German pilots accept the trade. They form Sturmgruppen, assault groups specifically trained and equipped for close-range bomber attacks. These pilots fly heavily armored Focke-Wulf 190s, press attacks to point-blank range, and attempt to destroy bombers with single firing passes. The Sturmgruppen achieve impressive results when they succeed. On July 7, 1944, Sturmgruppe 4 attacked a formation of B-24 liberators over central Germany. In a single coordinated assault, they claim 28 bombers destroyed. Post-war records suggest the actual number was lower, perhaps 18 to 20, but even the lower figure represents devastating effectiveness. The cost, however, is proportional. Sturmgruppe 4 loses 12 fighters in the engagement. The unit is essentially destroyed as a fighting force and requires months to reconstitute. This is the calculus of probability warfare. Both sides are applying it. The Americans fill approach corridors with defensive fire, accepting ammunition expenditure and friendly fire risk in exchange for greater effectiveness. The Germans concentrate their fighters for mass attacks, accepting higher loss rates in exchange for penetrating the defensive fire and destroying bombers. Neither side can avoid mathematics. Success requires accepting costs. By spring of 1944, another element enters the equation that changes everything. Long-range fighter escort. The P-51 Mustang, powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, has the range to escort bombers deep into Germany. With drop tanks, a P-51 can fly to Berlin and back with reserves for combat. The earlier P-47 Thunderbolt, excellent in many respects, lacks the range for deep penetration missions. The P-38 Lightning has the range but suffers from various technical problems in the European theatre. The P-51 is the solution. The first P-51 equipped groups arrived in England in late 1943. By February 1944, they began escorting deep penetration raids. By spring, they are arriving in large numbers. By D-Day in June, the 8th Air Force can put up hundreds of Mustangs on a single mission. The impact on Luftwaffe defensive tactics is immediate and profound. German fighters now face a two-front problem. Attack the bombers and expose yourself to the escorts. Engage the escorts and leave the bombers unmolested. Either choice carries risk. The Luftwaffe attempts to separate the problems by using dedicated escort fighters to tie up American escorts, while the bomber destroyers attack the formations. Messerschmitt 109s provide top cover, while Focke-Wulf 190s with heavy armament press through to the bombers. The tactic works sometimes. The American escorts cannot be everywhere simultaneously, but mathematics favors Americans. The 8th Air Force can sortie more fighters than the Luftwaffe can counter. Attrition grinds down German fighter strength. Pilot losses mount. Training for replacement pilots is compressed as the need grows desperate. Quality declines. A German fighter pilot in early 1944 might have 200 hours of flight training before reaching a combat unit. By late 1944, that drops to 100 hours or less. They are sending boys in aircraft against men in aircraft. The bomber gunner's role shifts in this new environment. They are no longer the primary defense. The P-51 seconds are, but the gunners remain essential. They create a threat that forces German fighters into positions where the escorts can engage. They provide backup defense when escorts are not immediately available. They protect damaged bombers struggling to maintain formation, and critically, they maintain morale. A bomber crew feels less helpless with guns to fire than without. The psychological component cannot be dismissed. Flying a bomber deep into Germany, knowing every mile takes you further from safety, knowing the flak and fighters wait ahead, is profoundly stressful. Training, discipline, and group cohesion help crews manage that stress. But so does the ability to fight back. A gunner behind a .50 caliber has agency. He can affect the outcome. He is not merely a passenger waiting to be shot down. This matters. Post-war psychological studies of bomber crews identify defensive armament as a significant factor in morale and unit cohesion. Crews that felt they could defend themselves showed better stress management and lower rates of combat fatigue than hypothetical crews in unarmed aircraft. The RAF tested unarmed high-speed bombers, notably the de Havilland Mosquito. The Mosquito performed brilliantly, but it was a 2-crew light bomber. The psychological dynamic differed fundamentally from a 10-crew heavy bomber. In 1943, the eminent physicist Freeman Dyson, then working with RAF Bomber Command's Operational Research Section, proposed removing defensive armament from Lancaster bombers. His calculations suggested the weight savings and drag reduction would increase speed enough to provide better protection than the guns offered. The proposal was rejected. The operational research mathematics supported Dyson's conclusion, but the human factors did not. Crew morale, the ability to fight back, the psychological value of offensive defense, these elements could not be quantified in equations but were nonetheless real. The American experience parallels the British conclusions. By late 1944, when P-51 escorts are ubiquitous and Luftwaffe fighter strength is declining, some American planners suggest reducing defensive armament on bombers. Remove the ball turret, they propose. The weight savings improve performance. The reduced drag increases speed. The ball turret gunner could be eliminated, reducing crew size and training requirements. Some bomb groups implement this experimentally. The ball turret is removed from select B-24 Liberators in the 15th Air Force, operating from Italy. The weight savings is approximately 1,500 pounds. The center of gravity shifts forward, improving handling characteristics. But the crews resist. They want the ball turret. They want guns. Even if the mathematical probability of the ball turret scoring a kill is low, even if the escorts handle most threats, the crews want the option to defend themselves. The resistance is emotional, not rational, but emotion drives human behavior as much as reason. The ball turrets stay, on most aircraft, through the end of the war. A concession to psychology over pure operational efficiency, the human factor in warfare, back to the technical evolution of gunnery tactics. By summer of 1944, the probability approach was standard across the 8th Air Force, not because of official doctrine changes, though those eventually follow, but because it works and because crews teach each other. A new gunner arrives at his squadron, goes on his first mission, sees how the veterans do it, adopts their techniques. The culture shifts from the bottom up. Debriefings after missions include discussion of gunnery tactics. Intelligence officers ask specific questions. What approach angles did enemy fighters use? What ranges? What closing speeds? Which defensive positions were most effective? The data accumulates. Patterns emerge. The patterns inform briefings for subsequent missions. The cycle feeds itself. Empirical evidence drives tactical refinement. The concept of critical approach corridors becomes formalized. Operations research teams create three-dimensional maps, showing high-probability attack zones relative to bomber formations. These maps are not classified. They are distributed to combat units. Crews study them, gunners memorize them. When a fighter appears, gunners immediately assess which corridor it is entering and concentrate fire there. The corridors vary based on formation position. A bomber in the lead position faces different threat corridors than a bomber flying tail-end Charlie at the rear of the formation. A high squadron faces different threats than a low squadron. The maps account for these variations. Each position has its specific threat profile and corresponding defensive priorities. Gunners learn to think in terms of zones and corridors rather than individual targets. The language changes. A veteran gunner does not say, "I fired at a 109. He says, "I saturated the 3 o'clock corridor when they came through." The shift from target-centric to zone-centric thinking reflects the shift from precision to probability tactics. Rate of fire becomes a key performance metric. How many rounds per minute can a gunner sustain? The theoretical maximum for a 50 caliber Browning is 850 rounds per minute. Practical sustained rate is lower because barrels overheat, ammunition must be reloaded, stoppages must be cleared. A good waist gunner can average 500 rounds per minute over a sustained engagement. An excellent gunner might reach 600. Barrel changes become routine. The 50 caliber Browning can fire approximately 250 rounds before the barrel heats to the point where accuracy degrades and failure risk increases. In heavy action, gunners change barrels multiple times per mission. The procedure takes less than a minute with practice. Remove the hot barrel, install a cool barrel. Resume fire. The hot barrel cools while the cool barrel fires. Rotate as needed. This requires carrying spare barrels. Weight and space are always limited on a bomber. Every pound of spare barrels is a pound not available for bombs or fuel, but commanders accept the trade-off. Effective defensive fire saves bombers. Saved bombers complete missions. Completed missions justify the entire enterprise. The spare barrels are worth their weight. Ammunition load increases as tactics shift toward high-volume fire. Early B-17 models carried approximately 4,000 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition total for all gun positions. Later models carry 6,000 or more. Crews augment this with additional cans of ammunition stowed wherever space allows. The radio operator's compartment, normally relatively empty except for the radio equipment, becomes a magazine. Ammunition cans stack in every available corner. The weight compounds. A loaded 50 caliber ammunition can weigh approximately 40 pounds. 100 cans is 4,000 pounds. Add the guns themselves, the turrets, the gunners and their equipment. The defensive armament system represents a significant fraction of the bomber's gross weight, but it is a weight well spent if it brings crews home. The Luftwaffe, observing American defensive tactics evolving, attempted various counters. One approach is standoff weapons. The Werfer Granat 21 rocket can be launched from 1,000 meters outside the effective 50 caliber range. Each launcher carries one rocket. A Messerschmitt 109 can carry 2 launchers, one under each wing. The rocket motor burns for approximately 1 second, accelerating the 45 kilogram projectile to subsonic velocity. The warhead contains about half a kilogram of explosive. In theory, a formation of German fighters equipped with rockets could engage a bomber formation from safe standoff range, saturate the formation with explosive projectiles, and break it up without facing defensive fire. In practice, the rockets prove difficult to aim and unreliable to detonate. Pilots must fly straight and level during launch to have any hope of accuracy. That straight and level flight makes them vulnerable to escort fighters. Many rockets fail to detonate. Those that do often miss by wide margins. The weapon is more psychological than effective. The psychological impact is real, however. Bomber crews report that rocket attacks are terrifying. The rockets trail smoke as they streak toward the formation. Crew members can see them coming. The suspense between launch and impact or miss is agonizing. Some rockets pass harmlessly between bombers. Others detonate among the formation with devastating effect. A rocket hit can destroy a bomber outright. Near misses a shower surrounding the aircraft with shrapnel. But the rockets do not decisively shift the tactical balance. They are too inaccurate and too unreliable. The Luftwaffe continues to rely primarily on gun attacks, which require closing to within American defensive fire range, which brings the mathematics of probability back into play. The Americans fill the zones. The Germans penetrate or break off. The calculus continues. Another Luftwaffe innovation is aerial bombing of formations. The concept is audacious. A twin-engine bomber, typically a Junkers 88, flies above the American formation and drops bombs on it from above. The bombs fall through the formation, hopefully striking one or more bombers. In practice, this proves even less effective than rockets. The bombers are small targets from above. The formation is spread across hundreds of yards. The probability of a falling bomb hitting a specific bomber is infinitesimally small. The tactic achieves occasional lucky hits. A bomb dropped from a Junkers 88 strikes a B-17 inches the formation on a mission to Berlin in May of 1944. The B-17 explodes. The crew was killed instantly. But such incidents are rare enough to be noteworthy. The tactic is abandoned after a few months of experimentation. The resources required do not justify the minimal results. The most effective Luftwaffe tactic remains the close-in gun attack. Fighters press through defensive fire to point-blank range and empty their cannons into the bombers. This works when it works. The cost is high. Sturmgruppen tactics, the heavily armoured assault groups, achieve dramatic results but suffer proportionate losses. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe could not sustain these losses. Experienced pilots are irreplaceable at this stage of the war. The bomber gunners, meanwhile, continue refining their probability tactics. One refinement is coordinated fire by position. All ball turret gunners in a formation focus on underbelly approaches. All tail gunners focus on rear approaches. The concentration of similar fields of fire creates redundancy. If one gunner is killed or wounded, others covering the same zone continue firing. The defensive capability degrades but does not collapse. Another refinement is ammunition management. Gunners learn to balance sustained fire with conservation. Open fire early, yes. Maintain fire, yes. But do not simply hold the trigger down continuously. Fire in controlled bursts, 4 to 5 second bursts. Pause momentarily to assess. Resume fire. This extends ammunition supply while maintaining effective volume of fire. It also reduces barrel heating and mechanical wear. Veteran gunners develop an almost musical sense of rhythm. Fire, pause, fire, pause. The rhythm varies with the threat. A close-in attack requires sustained fire with minimal pause. A distant threat allows longer pauses between bursts. The rhythm is not taught. It is learned through experience. Each gunner develops his own pattern. Stoppages, jams, and mechanical failures are inevitable, with sustained high-volume fire. The 50 caliber Browning is reliable but not infallible. Ammunition belts can twist or bind. Cartridges can fail to feed properly. Extraction can fail, leaving a spent case in the chamber. Headspace can shift, preventing the bolt from closing fully. Any of these stoppages render the gun temporarily useless. Clearing stoppages under combat conditions is a learned skill. Gunners train on stoppage drills until they can execute them reflexively. Remove the belt, cycle the action, clear the chamber, inspect the feed mechanism, identify the problem, fix it, reload, resume fire. Under ideal conditions, this takes 30 seconds. Under combat conditions, with stress and fear and limited space and cold hands, it takes longer. Every second the gun is silent is a second the formation's defensive fire is reduced. Some stoppages cannot be cleared in flight. A ruptured cartridge case that leaves material in the chamber might require tools not available in the air. A broken extractor might be impossible to replace mid-mission. In these cases, the gun is out of action for the duration. The gunner assists other crew members or takes over another gun position if someone is wounded. The redundancy of having multiple gun positions mitigates single-point failures. A bomber with 13 gun positions can lose several and remain defensible. A bomber with 5 gun positions, like early B-17 models, loses a significant fraction of defensive capability, with each gun knocked out. This is one reason the B-17G, with its chin turret and additional guns, survives better than earlier models. More guns means more redundancy, means more survivability. Technical Sergeant Robert Mitchell, the waist gunner we met at the beginning over Schweinfurt, continues flying missions through the winter and into spring of 1944. Each mission adds to his understanding of probability tactics. He stops thinking about hitting specific fighters. He thinks about filling corridors. When fighters appear, his response is automatic. Identify the corridor, open fire, sustain fire, walk the tracers through the zone. Create a barrier. Mitchell's evolution as a gunner mirrors the larger evolution of 8th Air Force gunnery. He starts with careful aim and precision. Results are poor. He adapts. He learns from veterans. He adopts the garden hose technique. Results improve. He refines his approach through experience. By his 20th mission, he is one of the veterans teaching new gunners. The knowledge propagates. On a mission to Brunswick in February 1944, Mitchell's bomber was attacked by 4 Focke-Wulf 190s simultaneously. Company front attack, all 4 coming in from the beam. Mitchell opens fire at 1,200 yards, long range, outside theoretical effective range, but he is not trying to hit them at 1,200 yards. He is establishing fire in the corridor. Make them fly through it. The Focke-Wulfs commit. They are Sturmgruppe aircraft, heavily armoured, designed for this. They cannot turn back. That is the tactic. Full commitment. They accelerate to maximum speed and charge. Mitchell sustains fire. The other waist gunner, the ball turret gunner, the tail gunner, all fire simultaneously. Gunners from adjacent bombers engage as well. The corridor fills with tracers. One Focke-Wulf takes hits. Pieces fly from the cowling. Black smoke. The fighter maintains course for another 3 seconds. Cannon flashing. Rounds strike Mitchell's bomber. Impacts along the fuselage. Then the Focke-Wulf rolls inverted and dives away. Confirmed kill, multiple witnesses. But the other 3 Focke-Wulfs reach the firing range. They hammer the formation with 30mm fire. 2 B-17 seconds go down. A third is catastrophically damaged but somehow maintains flight long enough to reach England before crash landing. Mitchell's bomber takes damage but survives. The pilot reports 4 engines running, flight controls functional, bomb bay intact. They continue the mission, drop their bombs on the target, return to England, land safely. Post-mission inspection counts 37 holes in the fuselage and wings. Most are small caliber, probably 13mm. 3 are large enough to be 30mm, but they passed through non-critical areas. Luck. Mitchell files his after-action report. He is careful with his kill claim. He knows other gunners also fired at the same fighter. He claims 1 destroyed, shared credit. The intelligence officer notes this. Later, all the claims for that particular fighter are aggregated. 5 gunners from 3 different bombers all have valid claims. Credit is divided, 1/5 of a kill each. Mitchell's personal score increases by 0.2. This is how accounting works. It is imperfect but honest. By March of 1944, Mitchell completed his 25th mission. 25 is the magic number. Complete 25 combat missions, and you rotate back to the States. The policy changes as the war progresses. Early in the campaign, the tour is 25. Later, it becomes 30, then 35. But for Mitchell, arriving in England in mid-1943, the tour is 25. His final mission is to Berlin, March 6, 1944. The so-called Big Week has just concluded. 5 consecutive days of maximum effort raids against German aircraft production facilities. The Luftwaffe has been battered, but Berlin remains heavily defended. The longest mission yet attempted by the 8th Air Force. Over 1,100 miles round trip, 8 hours in the air. Every minute of it is hostile. The Luftwaffe responds with everything available. Over 200 fighters engage the bomber formations. The air over Berlin becomes a chaos of aircraft, tracers, smoke, explosions, falling bombers, parachutes. Mitchell's bomber is part of the lead group, always the most heavily attacked. Fighters hit them during the bomb run. Mitchell fires until his barrels glow red. Change barrels twice. Burns through over 1,000 rounds. The gun gets so hot the hand grips are painful to touch even through his gloves. A Messerschmitt 109 makes a beam attack from Mitchell's side. Mitchell does not track it carefully. He does not lead it with precision calculation. He opens fire early, fills the corridor, walks tracers across space rather than chasing the aircraft. The Messerschmitt commits. It has no choice. The pilot has committed to the attack run and cannot deviate without abandoning the shot entirely. The fighter flashes through Mitchell's stream of fire. Pieces fly off its wing. Black smoke trails behind. The Messerschmitt does not explode dramatically. It does not cartwheel out of control. It simply diverges from its attack path, rolls inverted, and dives away trailing smoke and glycol. Mitchell will claim a probable. The debriefing officer will credit him with the damage. The actual fate of that fighter and its pilot remains unknown, lost in the chaos of combat over Berlin. But Mitchell survives his 25th mission. His bomber survives. They make it back to England. As they cross the coast, the pilot comes over the intercom. "We're home, boys. We made it." The relief in his voice is palpable. They have beaten the odds. They have completed a tour. They will live. Mitchell returns to the States. He is assigned to Kingman Army Airfield in Arizona as a gunnery instructor. He will spend the rest of the war teaching new gunners the lessons he learned over Germany. The lessons about probability over precision, about filling zones rather than chasing targets, about sustained fire and barrel discipline and ammunition management, about the garden hose technique that saved his life 25 times. On his first day as an instructor, Mitchell addresses a class of fresh gunners, kids, most of them, 18, 19 years old. They have never been shot at. They have never watched a bomber explode with 10 men aboard. They have never counted parachutes and come up short. They will learn these things soon. Enough. "You're not trying to be a sharpshooter," Mitchell tells them. "Forget what you learned about careful aim. You won't have time to be careful. You'll have seconds, maybe less. So you don't wait for the perfect shot. There is no perfect shot. There's only math. Fill the corridor. Make it so expensive to attack that it costs more than it's worth. You're not hunting fighters. You're hunting the air itself. Fill it. Saturate it. Make it dangerous to breathe." That's how we win. The transformation of American bomber gunnery from precision shooting to probability tactics represents one of the significant operational adaptations of the air war. It required abandoning cherished beliefs about marksmanship. It required accepting uncomfortable realities, including the risk of friendly fire. It required trusting mathematics over instinct. The transition was not immediate or uniform. It happened gradually, through trial and error, through loss and adaptation, through veterans teaching new gunners in crew quarters and over the intercom during combat. The cost was real and documented. 3 B-17 seconds confirmed loss to friendly fire. An unknown number was damaged. Crew members killed or wounded by 50 caliber rounds that came from American guns. The psychological burden of knowing you might hit a friend while trying to hit an enemy. These costs are part of the accounting, though they rarely appear in official histories. But so are the bombers that made it home, because defensive fire forced a fighter to break off early. The missions were completed because the Luftwaffe could not sustain the losses from pressing attacks against increasingly effective defensive fire. The gradual shift in initiative from defenders to attackers, the cumulative weight of probability applied over thousands of missions. The numbers tell part of the story. The 8th Air Force claimed 6,259 enemy aircraft destroyed by bomber gunners during the war. Post-war analysis suggests the actual number was closer to 2,500 to 3,000. Still impressive. Still significant. But the more important number is not fighters shot down. It is bombers that completed missions. In early 1943, before probability tactics, mission abort rates due to fighter attack ran as high as 15 to 20% on some raids. By late 1944, after probability tactics became standard, abort rates dropped to single digits. Fighter deterrence mattered more than fighter destruction. A German pilot who broke off his attack early, who decided the defensive fire was too heavy to risk, who chose to seek an easier target elsewhere, was as good as shot down from the bomber's perspective. The bomber survived the pass. The formation maintained integrity. The mission continued. That was the objective. Probability tactics achieved that objective more effectively than precision tactics. The legacy extends beyond World War II. The principle that volume and position matter more than precision, in high-speed aerial combat, influences jet-age fighter tactics, missile defense systems, and modern air combat doctrine. The concept of threat corridors and zone defense becomes foundational to air warfare theory. The statisticians and operations researchers who analyzed bomber defensive fire go on to shape post-war military planning. Operations research becomes a standard military discipline. The methods proven over Germany become doctrine. Captain Robert Lindsay, the actuary who explained probability theory to combat gunners, wrote his technical paper in late 1944. It circulates through military education institutions. By the 1950s, it was required reading at Air War College. In it, he addresses the central paradox that troubled commanders throughout the war. Individual humans cannot solve the equations of aerial combat fast enough to be effective, he writes. The human brain, remarkable as it is, cannot process 14 variables in 3 dimensions in the fraction of a second available during a fighter attack. But groups of humans, firing according to statistical principles, create emergent effects that transcend individual capability. The whole becomes greater than the sum of parts. The formation's defensive fire is not the sum of individual gunners' accuracy. It is the product of their combined fire filling critical space. Quantity creates quality through probability. Lindsay's paper became influential beyond military circles. His work on probability and group behavior informs early computer science, game theory, and systems analysis. The principle that intelligent agents, following simple rules, can create complex emergent behavior becomes foundational to multiple disciplines. The bombers over Germany were a laboratory for ideas that would shape the post-war world. The German fighter pilots, those who survive, carry their own lessons forward. They learn that mass defensive fire is not something to be dismissed or underestimated, regardless of whether it achieves confirmed kills. They develop deep respect for B-17 and B-24 formations, describing them in post-war interviews as flying through steel rain or attacking a storm. Fear is real. Fear shapes decisions. Fear drives pilots to break off attacks early, to seek easier targets, to conserve themselves. Major Heinz Noack, a Luftwaffe ace with 33 confirmed victories, writes in his memoir about attacking American bomber formations. You commit yourself to the attack knowing you are flying into a certain defensive fire. You cannot avoid it. The question is whether you will be the one they hit. Statistics say most passes are survivable. Statistics say most defensive fire misses. But statistics do not matter when you are the one being shot at. Every time you think this might be the time, your number comes up. Noack survives the war. Many of his comrades do not. The mathematics grinds down both sides. The Americans have more numbers, more production, more trained crews, more resources. The Germans have experience and desperation. Neither is sufficient alone. Together with the P-51 escorts arriving in strength, they shift the balance decisively. By summer of 1944, the Luftwaffe is fighting a losing battle of attrition. The bomber gunners continued their work through the end of the European War. The tactics continue evolving. The fundamental shift from precision to probability remains the core principle. Fill the corridors. Sustain fire. Trust the mathematics. It does not guarantee survival. Nothing guarantees survival, but it improves the odds. In a war where survival is probability, improving odds is everything. The final accounting is complicated. How much did bomber defensive fire contribute to Allied victory in Europe? Impossible to quantify precisely. The air war was a system. Bombers, fighters, ground attacks, strategic bombing, tactical bombing, interdiction, air superiority, all interconnected. Isolating the contribution of one element is methodologically problematic. But we can say this. Bomber defensive fire forced the Luftwaffe to accept costs for attacking bomber formations. Those costs accumulated. The cumulative attrition of German fighter strength contributed to the Allies achieving air superiority. Air superiority enabled the success of the Normandy invasion. The invasion liberated France. The liberation accelerated Germany's defeat. Defensive fire was one link in a chain of causation that led to Allied victory. The men who manned the guns deserve recognition for their part in that chain. They were mostly young, mostly scared, mostly inadequately prepared for what they faced. But they learned, they adapted. They survived or did not. Those who survived taught others. The knowledge propagated. The tactics evolved. The probability mathematics proved out. And so we return to where we began. October 14th, 1943. 25,000 feet over Schweinfurt, Technical Sergeant Robert Mitchell, firing through space that contains friendly wings, applying mathematics he does not fully understand but has learned to trust. The Fokker-Wulf that evaded his first burst circles for another pass. This time Mitchell does not chase it, does not try to track with precision. He identifies the corridor, opens fire early, sustains fire through the zone, creates danger the pilot must penetrate or avoid. The pilot makes his calculation, his own probability assessment, attack through the curtain of tracers and risk being the 1 in 1,000 rounds that connects, or break off and seek another angle, another target, another opportunity. He breaks off, rolls away, lives to fight another day. Mitchell has not shot him down, has not scored a confirmed hit, but he has achieved the tactical objective. The bomber survives the pass, the formation maintains integrity, the mission continues. This moment, multiplied across thousands of engagements, tens of thousands of sorties, millions of rounds fired, defines the evolution of bomber defensive tactics in World War II. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the steady application of probability theory to aerial combat, executed by young men in freezing aluminum tubes 25,000 feet above a continent at war. The mathematics work. Not perfectly, not every time, but often enough. Probability reaches up through the cold October sky and takes its bite from the Luftwaffe, one corridor at a time, one fighter deterred or damaged or destroyed at a time, until the cumulative weight of those probabilities shifts the balance of the air war. The guns continue to fire, the formations continue to fly, the bombers get through, the war grinds toward its conclusion, and the men who filled the corridors with fire earned their place in the accounting of victory. Thank you for reading. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.